Now I'd like to give the floor to Kathrin Schmidt.
First of all, thank you, Philemon, for coming here today and sharing your story. And thank you for the invitation to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And I was asked to talk about my experiences as a crew member on board the Juventa, as a sea rescuer, as an eyewitness to what is happening at the deadliest border in the world, Europe's doorstep. I'm not a seafarer, nor am I a lifeguard. I never imagined myself as a sea rescuer. I even get seasick. Yet, I have committed myself to saving lives at sea because people are dying. And these days, I may have to stand trial along with 9 other Juventa crew members for providing the most basic of human rights which the European Union has thus far been reluctant to protect, the right of life. And protecting this human right and European values in general is today called favoring illegal immigration and is punished with up to 20 years imprisonment. Witnessing people drowning, suffocating, aspirating salt water and petrol. Situations like this are commonplace for sea rescuers at Europe's doorstep. We simply did what had to be done without thinking twice. Rescuing people where they can be rescued because it's the right thing to do. This should never be subject to political discussion. Yet, we may face trial for having saved 14,000 refugees at sea. The core injustice, however, does not even concern the criminalization of us, privileged Europeans and NGOs. Much more importantly, I want to raise my voice today on behalf of those less privileged, who continue to die every day trying to reach safety at European shores. I'm part of the generation that grew up asking their grandparents, what did you do against it? And I'm also part of that generation which will have to answer that very question to their own grandchildren. I must confess that I feel the irony of my position today, speaking at this conference at the European Parliament, for it was European forces and the EU member states who had not only removed the Juventa from where she was most effective in saving lives, but also initiated the criminal prosecution against 10 of us. It is also with the knowledge and support of the European Union that Italy has brokered an agreement with the very same people we are accused of colluding with. The so-called Libyan Coast Guard, set up by a Libyan militia equally active amongst the ranks of people traffickers, has been funded and equipped by Italy in order to return migrants into conditions where they face torture, detention, rape, deportation, and death. Italy, aided by the European Union, is financing crimes against humanity. We have witnessed the so-called Libyan Coast Guard operate in the name of Europe, threatening and endangering our crews, shooting at migrants' boats and people in the water, deliberately killing people in need. The extended arm of the European Union is violating and betraying over and over again those very same regulations that are one of the highest political accomplishments of our time, the Declaration of Human Rights. The Juventa and NGOs in general bore witness to the human rights violations committed by the Libyan Coast Guard under the aegis of an EU scheme. Thus, our mere presence seemed to constitute a threat that had to be obliterated. The story of a crew and the story of the Juventa, also my story, is indeed that of a bad crime novel. Let me tell you chapter 1 of that novel. In May 2017, the Italian Maritime Rescue Coordination Center chose one of the busiest days in the history of Mediterranean mass death to forcibly remove the Juventa from the search and rescue area. When we received those instructions, 7 migrant boats in our proximity were in distress. We were instructed not to assist them, despite several other NGOs asking for assistance. The Juventa had to follow the orders of the Italian authorities. So 14 hours later, it was at 2:42 at night in the port of Lampedusa when a bugging device was clandestinely planted on the bridge of our ship by an Italian mobile task force. At the time, I was the rescue boat driver on board. Meanwhile, in the search and rescue area, myself and 2 more crew members had stayed back aboard Juventa's mobile fast rescue boat to support other NGOs in what escalated into an ongoing, frantic rescue operation of over 90 hours, 4 days. When I counted 21 boats with thousands of migrants on board, on the horizon, it was when my heart sank and my anger grew. In a time when every helping hand and every single life jacket meant another life saved, those responsible had temporarily detained our ship, forcibly docked in the port of Lampedusa with hundreds of life jackets and numerous life rafts on board, utterly useless. At the end of those 4 days, I remember the most devastating moment. We had lost 5 boats with more than 800 people to the stormy darkness of that night. 800 people vanished in the sea without a trace, without even having made it into a missing migrant statistic. Sentenced to death by a European border regime. That night, I clearly remember, also vanished what was left of Europe's values, dignity, and hope. This is how I learned to understand the sinister motive. Systematically denying assistance to migrants who will die without it, either at sea or in the Libyan detention camps to which they are returned. The criminalization of civilian maritime rescue is part of a willed strategy that makes the Mediterranean the world's deadliest border. On August 2nd, 2017, 3 months after the investigative effort of bugging our ship at the expense of many hundreds of lives, the Juventa was again ordered to the port of Lampedusa, searched, and eventually seized. The ship was seized under an anti-mafia legislation as a so-called preemptive measure to prevent possible future criminal acts, only days after we had rescued over 3,500 people on the orders of and in collaboration with the Italian Coast Guard. At the time, I was head of mission on the Juventa, and our ship was searched for guns by over 50 police officers in vain. The worst, however, was not that our personal belongings remained confiscated to this day or that wall claddings were removed, cupboards and drawers empty so that by the end of the day our ship looked like it had been hit by a man-made storm. No. The most difficult thought to bear in that moment was the growing conviction that all these measures were simply aimed at preventing us from helping people in need. A formally authorized legal action sentencing people to death. I was treated like a criminal, my crew were treated like criminals, because they had stepped in when European governments betrayed their own professed values and left people to drown at their borders. That it should fall solely on civil society to defend the human rights of the most vulnerable is concerning. That their work should be discredited, obstructed, and prosecuted is criminal. For the past 20 months, the rescue ship Juventa has remained frozen in the port of Trapani and prevented from launching by Italian authorities. Performing the most elementary form of care for the life of another has become subject to juridical punishment. And today I have my own accusation to live by. I accuse those prosecuting humanitarian aid and denying assistance to people in need. I accuse those selling off the European Convention on Human Rights. I accuse those lacking the decency and backbone to stand up for the rights of migrants, but instead sentencing them to death at sea or in Libya of standing in grave violation of international law. What is at stake in this investigation goes beyond the personal freedom of our crew. When criminalization of humanitarian aid is used as a political strategy and the violation of human rights by proxy is remunerated by European democracies, nothing less is at risk than the freedom of our society. If saving lives at sea is punished with a prison sentence, it is certainly not our actions that have failed the people. A society in which seeking shelter when you are in need and rescuing those who are dying is considered a crime, in which over 8 rescue ships are actively prevented from saving lives, is not the world I want to live in. The IUVENTA-Crew is not intimidated, neither by discrediting smear campaigns, nor by the menacing gestures of political power. Doing the right thing doesn't necessarily make you popular. On the contrary, we now understand that it can become quite inconvenient. I appeal to all members of European parliaments, and I appeal to all members of civil society not to shy away from this inconvenience and to acknowledge each and everyone's privilege, their accountability for the mass deaths at Europe's external borders, and their responsibility to stop it. To create a Europe in which people driven by the search for safety and dignity, and those who have stood in solidarity with that mission, can walk as free women and men. Thank you.